Welcome, everyone, to the Leadership in Quarters interview series, where we have leaders come here to share their perspectives on different leadership topics. I'm Josh Selden, and today we have Amit Agrawal here to share his perspective. Now, a little bit about Amit before we get started. He's a technical engineering director that works for one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world, and he's currently on a short-term assignment here in the US. He's originally from India, and he's worked across multiple business units, where his key focus areas were on creating business value via supply chain transformations. So welcome, Amit.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
Of course. So today's topic's all about cultural adaptivity. And so definitely want to get some ideas and some thoughts that you have coming from a different country, coming here and working in the US with people that may have different cultures and approaches to work different than what you're used to. So let's get started. We'll jump right in. So Can you talk to us about how you approach moving to a new country with a culture that is very different from what you're used to?
That's an interesting question. So, as you shared with your audience, I've been in the US for the last 3 years. And when I was moving to US, COVID was at its peak. And I really did not have opportunity in terms of coming, doing a look-see and going back and kind of preparing for it. So as you move to a new country or a new culture, it's really important that you prepare yourself moving to that country. So when you come for the first time, it's really like you're in a honeymoon phase, which I would say, where you're attracted and you're fascinated by things. But slowly it settles down that things are very different, systems are very different. And that's where preparation kicks in. I was fortunate enough to have mentors and people who have done this in the past. And they were able to tell me how to prepare well. I mean, basic things like how to get a credit card or get a social security number here in the US, which is really needed for you to function well. And if you don't prepare for such things upfront, it is very difficult for you to get going. And sometimes then you start feeling like homesick, or you feel like things are very different. So preparation is a big part of it. Second is, as you come in, I think you have to be very observant. You have to really observe people's style, how people interact on a daily basis. I come from a city which is a city which runs 24/7, and people are very, very busy in their normal day to day. But here in Greensboro, US, I see people have more time, and they have time to interact, to kind of have that small talk when they meet each other. And those are some basic styles that you want to kind of adapt as you move into a new location or a new culture, so that you feel part of the team, you feel part of the culture versus being somebody from outside. The second is having somebody who you can bounce off ideas with. So I was fortunate enough to have two of my best friends here in the US who I met during my assignment, who had this experience of welcoming people and also kind of helping me with settling down. So I was able to tell them issues that I was facing and get their opinion, etc. So having people who can help you with this is really helpful. The third I would say is, how do you become part of a community here? It is very important that you have the sense of belongingness. So as I came to US, I started a small community within the plant of people who are from Asia. And similarly, started looking for a community outside the plant, which helped me kind of feel part of this new culture. So I would say those are the things that I did to really acclimatize myself to this new culture.
I love that you said that. So you're trying to acclimate to the culture that you're coming into, but you're also building that sense of community inside and outside of your workspace, your plant, just so you don't lose that sense of home, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that really makes me think of another question. As somebody from the US, and I've worked with many different people from many different countries, and my thought process is always, how do I make it so they get used to my culture? How do they get used to the culture that they're bringing themselves into? How do you suppose you take somebody like me and acclimate myself into your culture? Because you're coming here, we're going to work together. It's not fair for this to be very one-sided. So I think at the same point, we should also figure out how to acclimate and be part of your culture in one of those kind of communities. So how do you suppose we go and do that?
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that for people to understand you, it is important that you understand people. You cannot expect people to go understand your culture without really learning about their culture. And that really comes by being very open-minded and being very transparent with the people that you are there in terms of trying to learn about their culture. Typically, I have interacted with a lot of people across US and Germany during this assignment. What I've realized is there are a couple of areas which bonds people. One is food. You can talk to a lot of individuals across different cultures about food, different cuisines, etc. It really helps you build that bonding. The second is sports. So as I came to US, I started learning about football, as in American football is something which is very unique about the American culture, and started having conversation with my colleagues, trying to understand the game. And by doing that, I was also able to open their eyes towards Indian culture from a sports standpoint, which is cricket. And recently we had the cricket tournament here in the US. And I had a bunch of people here at my home watching a cricket game between India and Pakistan. So it's a two-way street, as you said, making sure that you are open-minded and you're talking to them. Beyond sports and food, I think taking the sense of belongingness to the next level is when you start making the community beyond, say, the Indian community or the Asian community. How do you become part of the American community? How do you be part of their normal lives or be part of their day-to-day lives? And how do you become a part of their festivities? So this is something, when we came here, the first time when we celebrated a festival, it was just me and my wife celebrating the festival at home. And we were slightly homesick because it's not normal to just have two people celebrating the festival. So we decided to really open up ourselves in terms of going and be part of other people's festivals. So I was fortunate enough that my manager invited me to be part of Thanksgiving. I had a lot of colleagues inviting me to their home for lunches, etc. And we started doing something like that for our festivals. And in the last 3 years, as in last 2 years, we have had festivals where we had more than 20, 25 people at our place celebrating a Hindu festival. So I think it is really important to be open, and it is really important to learn the culture as you kind of try to build or share your culture with other people.
I think that's so important. We think about open-mindedness at work and with all the new things coming up, all the different ethnicities and genders and everything that people bring as they bring their full selves to work. And so I think it's so important to be open-minded both ways. Both sides are open to new experiences and new things. And it's so great to hear that you've gotten that kind of support as you've come here and that your festivals and everything have grown over the past couple of years. So that's awesome to hear.
I think when people come to a different country, obviously they understand the culture, they get an awareness of the culture. But when you talk about cultural adaptivity, where you become part of that culture or you kind of create a mini culture for yourself, it is important that your community is beyond, say, for example, in my case, beyond an Indian community, an Asian community. It has to be a community across different cultures. That's where you really understand those different cultures and somehow create that micro culture, which is a blend of all these different cultures that you're working with.
Yeah, we definitely need to do that and blend together, or else we can't build those relationships and bring everything back together and work together. So on the topic of culture, I can easily say that I know that what I'd call the US professional culture is very different and not easy to deal with, especially as somebody from the US who works for a global company. I've seen the cultures in other countries where asking somebody to do something for you or giving direction is taken very different than what we do here. So how do you adapt to managing people in this culture coming from where you were before? And what are some of the things you've learned?
So when you're managing people, one of the basic things, irrespective of whichever culture you are, whether it's the same culture, it is how do you develop trust between the individuals? That is really the foundation, irrespective of whether you're from the same culture or a different culture. And as a manager of other employees, I always feel that it is important as part of the initial relationship development that you invest time in building trust. How do you make sure you're meeting your commitments? How do you make sure that things that people are asking for help, you're offering those things? When it comes to people from different cultures, I think the challenge really is, for example, gestures, right? People from India typically nod their head to say yes or no. Coming to US, even if somebody says yes, it does not mean that they agree to it. I think it is that they acknowledge something. And for me, as I was managing those people, I realized that just assuming they saying yes does not mean that they, which is totally different in the Indian context. Right. So that took me time initially trying to understand what the behaviors are or gestures are to make sure that the two parties have the same understanding coming out of a one-on-one, coming out of a meeting, etc. It is sometimes easy to write it down and make sure that the understanding is the same. So that is what I used to really help make sure that my reportee and myself, we were on the same page. But once you have that understanding developed, it is normal.
That's interesting that I think being from the culture here, you kind of take it for granted. You don't really see that because it's normal for us. So again, I think that's a great example of you adapting and acclimating to the professional side of our culture here. But what have you done or stayed true to from your culture and your approach that you've brought here as well? Because again, like we talked earlier, where it's a two-way street, we shouldn't really expect you to come here and completely do what we do here. What have you done and brought over here as well?
I think I've changed my style slightly, and the style is different with every reportee that I have. It's not that I have the same style across all the reportees. So I have catered or kind of modified my style depending on the person that I'm working with. But in terms of my values and things that I want to drive as a leader, I haven't changed that. The outcomes that I'm looking from my organization or the way I would expect my organization to behave, the expectations have been the same. So I think it is really about how do you share the same expectations? How do you cater the message to a different audience here, but still getting the same outcome from them?
So, is there anything else that you've brought over from your culture's approach to work? I think it's good to see that the style has changed or grown and altered a little bit, but is there anything that we severely lack here that you've had to bring over and kind of adapt here as well?
I think every culture has its own strengths and every culture has its own opportunity, right? And as I came into this role or into this assignment, definitely I identified few things that I like to bring from my culture or place of work that I had previously. One of the things was how do we really be more business focused and drive results as a team versus driving results as an individual. And it is easier said than done, right? And I can just not go and tell people that from tomorrow engineering and ops have to work together and deliver a result, right? How do
Right.
you drive that culture? So it is first making sure you share with people on why it is important for you or why do you want to drive that change, and then identifying people who are early adopters to it, who you can partner with or who understand what you're trying to drive, and being very persistent about it. It's not easy to just go change culture in an organization. It is important that you remain true to that on everyday basis. As you have small wins, take those small wins to celebrate and recognize people who are doing it so that it can create a bigger win in the future. So that is something I've been trying to work with my colleagues here in terms of things I found which could be developed further from a team strength standpoint. And again, it's a work in progress. It's not something that is ever done. But I do believe that in the last 3 years, that is a culture I've been able to work with my organization. And we are very business focused as an engineering group here.
Yeah. And the results will show that culture is not built in a day, and
Yeah.
anything that's worth doing will take the time. And you touch on something that we've had in some of our other episodes where you can either mandate it or you can bring people along for the journey. And it's great to hear that your approach is that journey approach, because that's really how you get the people bought in. And that's really where you see the successful leaders, is the ones that
Yeah.
kind of take everybody by the hand, go through the journey together, and end up at the end all together, as opposed to somebody just kind of smashing their fist saying, you got to go do this. And
Yeah.
it's because I said so. It doesn't really work that way. So I'm really glad to see that you're really seeing the fruits of the labor after that time.
As an end of the day, we have a very famous saying, and I think you used in one of your podcasts was culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you do not spend time building that culture, you can come up with multiple strategies as a company or as an organization. It is really important that you foster that kind of culture which can deliver the strategy that you have in mind.
Right. And people don't realize that. People and teams can make or break you as a leader. And if they're not energized and empowered and don't feel valued, then they can kind of just sit there on their heels and not get things done. And it'll reflect poorly on us and impact the business. So I love that saying. I'm glad you brought that up. We've kind of touched on this already in the beginning, but what can people do intentionally, both inside and outside of the workplace, to help someone feel included, supported, and successful that may not originally be from here?
So I think there are a lot of things that people can do. As people come in from different cultures or different country, just making them feel welcome and included is very, very important. They are far, far away from their home and everything is new for them. Even, for example, in my case, driving was also new because we were trying to drive on the opposite side of the road, or at least we drive on the opposite side here compared to India. So really helping them out with basic things in terms of where you can buy food, where you can live, what are the normal norms in workplace, having people around you who can really guide you in those things. I would say across in work, outside work is very important. The second thing is definitely, as the individual is trying to learn, it is important the people around the individual also learn and provide feedback to the individual in terms of things which are okay, things which are not okay. Obviously, there is a bias that a lot of people have, whether it's unconscious or conscious bias. Overcoming those biases is important, and making sure that your bias is not impacting how you interact with that individual, I would say, is very, very important. So when I was coming to US, I've seen a lot of TV series which are based out of New York, and personally myself had a lot of bias in terms of how people in US are. And I come to this location, Greensboro, which only has 200,000 people in the city. It is a totally different culture than what I have seen in the TV series. So I think the entertainment industry does not do a good favor in terms of creating that bias. It's both ways, right? I'm sure you would have seen TV series which talks about Indian culture, and that's really not how Indian culture is. It's just maybe one mini part of that big culture that is out there. So it is important that as people kind of welcome others from different countries, they have to keep their biases aside and really make sure that they take time to get to know the person, know the culture, and help the person settle down.
You said two things that really resonated with me on that. And it's things I don't think a lot of people realize is the first is the biases, whether it's unconscious or conscious biases. As we in the US have people come in here that we interact with, we know we have biases. Like you said, it's either from TV series or other people we've interacted with. We have this bias of who's coming in. But I don't think everybody realizes that the biases, again, go both ways and that others have that bias for us as well. And it could be TV series, it could be movies. I remember when I was in school, I met somebody from the Dominican Republic whose parents had only seen the movie Animal House, which is about fraternities partying all the time. And that's all they thought college was like in the US. And so I don't think we really realize that the biases do go both ways. So I think that's so interesting. And the other thing that you touched on, which again, I don't think people really understand, is the help we can provide can be so minimal in our eyes, but can mean so much. And so you talked about things like driving on the other side of the road. It's something we don't think about because we're driving on the side that we're used to, and we can't seem to fathom that somebody coming in will have issues driving. They can just go get their license and they can go and just drive and everything's normal. But put anybody from here in India or England or anywhere where they drive on the opposite side of what we're used to, and now this is huge culture shock. But it doesn't trigger us when we have somebody coming in here. Or something as simple as a diet. I've worked with people from India who are vegetarians, and it's things that we don't think of if we don't have a vegetarian in our life, making sure that the food's not being cooked on surfaces that have had meat, and making sure that if we go and buy food for our team, we're making sure we buy one or two vegetarian options so that person doesn't feel left out, especially as we're trying to build that culture of inclusivity.
Yeah. The biggest thing here, Josh, is people have to realize, and it's for both, right? People who are hosting the new individual coming from the other country and the hosts and the individual, that people are not perfect. They will be imperfect. I think what is important is to see that people are trying their best in terms of helping each other out. And then I generally feel that more than 95% of the people really want to help each other out. That is just human nature in terms of making sure that the other individual is feeling comfortable, etc. So even if somebody is imperfect, what is important is whether that individual is trying or not. And you should give credit to that individual that the person is doing it for you.
Yeah, that's right. In some of our other episodes, we talk about intent versus impact. And it's tough to distinguish between the two. But in cases like this, I think you're right. The impact is usually obvious. But in some cases like this, where I think people have good intentions, you do kind of have to look at that intent as well and make sure people aren't perfect, like you said. And if their intentions are well, as long as they learn from it, when they don't keep doing the same thing over and over, it's really good to understand that a lot of their actions come from a good place.
Yeah, no, that's true. Like we had this expat back in India, and I think after this experience personally, I think I would have done a lot of things differently on how as I as an individual or a host would have behaved. I think it makes a lot of difference on how people around you work or how people around you react. And I think all of us can do a much better job in terms of making sure that the people who are leaving their lives behind and coming and maybe working with you for any reason, making sure that they feel welcome. At least for my journey, I was very fortunate to have a lot of individuals around me. As you said, very basic stuff like how to get a license here, how to get a credit card, if you have to go to the doctor, what needs to be done. All those basic things, they were able to guide me, and I never ever got a response saying that, no, you need to go figure it out yourself. So I was very lucky to have the right set of people around me.
Yeah. It's great to hear you were so supported, because that can really make or break an experience like this.
Yeah.
So, closing question. If you had to give a recommendation to somebody that's leaving their home culture, it could be somebody from India, somebody from the US, anybody going outside of their comfort zone, outside of their culture, to work in a culture that is very different from their own, what would that last piece of advice be?
So I think, first of all, you have to enjoy the experience. I was fortunate enough in this assignment or this experience that I was able to work with people from United States, from Germany, and I think I've made friends who are for life. So make sure that you are taking this as a journey that you want to enjoy versus making it a stressful situation for yourself. The second is, go slow to go fast. Take your time in the start to really build those relationships, understand the culture well, which will help you in the future. I've seen a lot of people in the past who kind of come in and obviously they are masters or experts in their areas and try to enforce the way they have worked, which rubs the people the wrong way. And as a result, they are not very successful in the assignment or in their experience altogether from a culture standpoint. So it is important that at the start you spend time in terms of investing on relationships with people, building those trust around them, so that it can help you have an experience which is really meaningful and you really enjoy it.
That's right. Things aren't worth doing if we can't enjoy it. It's really wise words there. So I really appreciate it, Amit. Thank you for giving your experience and your perspective on all of that. And I will make sure, for all the listeners, all of Amit's information will be in the description of the episode. So make sure that you check that out if you want to learn more about Amit and his experiences both inside and outside of the US. If you want any updates on the podcast, you can look at our Instagram at Lead In Quarters as well. Hopefully you check out our YouTube page at Lead In Quarters for these type of interviews that we have here. And you can email me with any questions, comments, topics, anything that you want at my email address, which is leadinquarters@gmail.com. So again, Amit, thank you so much for everything and all your perspective. And hopefully everybody listening has learned a whole lot from you.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks.